Black Girl was left to die with her newborn twins, but a Hell's Angel arrived and… A young mother is dumped in a frozen shack, clutching 2 crying newborns, with no one coming to save her. The storm outside is getting worse, and she knows she won't survive another hour. But then, a roaring motorcycle tears through the blizzard. A scary-looking biker kicks open the door, and what he does next changes everything. Because he isn't just a biker running from trouble. He knows something about the people who left her there. Something dark, something deadly. And when the ones who tried to kill her realize she's still alive, they're coming back to finish the job. Now a mother fighting to live, and a biker trying to fix the mistakes of his past, are thrown into a danger neither of them chose. But when the truth about why she was left to die comes out, will he be able to protect her and her babies? Before it's too late? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind's savage howl pierced through the cracks of the abandoned mining shack, but Isabella Carter barely heard it over her own labored breathing. Another contraction seized her body, and she gripped the edge of the rough wooden bench beneath her, splinters digging into her palms. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever known. Deep, primal, and unrelenting. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. "Please, Wes, come back." But even as the words left her lips, she knew they were hollow. Her husband had left her here 12 hours ago, promising to fetch supplies and help. Now, as the blizzard raged outside and her labor intensified, the truth settled over her like the thick blanket of snow covering the Colorado mountains. Wes wasn't coming back. Isabella shifted on the hard bench, trying to find any position that might ease the agony. The single lantern she had cast dancing shadows on the shack's weathered walls, its light growing dimmer as the oil ran low. Her fingers, numb from cold, fumbled with the thin blanket she'd managed to bring when Wes had driven them here in his truck. Another contraction ripped through her, and this time she couldn't hold back her cry. It echoed off the walls, coming back to her like a stranger's voice. "God," she prayed, tears freezing on her cheeks, "I know I haven't always been faithful, but please, please help my babies." The twins. She could feel them coming now, insistent and unstoppable. Isabella had always known this pregnancy was different, had felt twice the movement, heard 2 heartbeats at her secret doctor's visits. Visits she'd hidden from Wes, knowing his reaction would be violent. He hadn't wanted children, hadn't wanted anything that might tie him down or complicate his life of crime. Time seemed to blur as the labor progressed. Isabella found herself on the floor now, the rough-hewn boards beneath her offering little comfort. The lantern flickered ominously, and she forced herself to focus on its light, using it as an anchor against the waves of pain. "Almost there," she encouraged herself, her voice strange and distant in the empty shack. "Almost there, little ones." The first baby came with a rush of determination that Isabella didn't know she possessed. Working purely on instinct, she guided the infant into the world, her heart surging as a strong cry filled the bitter air. A boy. Through tears of joy and exhaustion, she quickly wrapped him in part of her blanket, tucking him close to her chest. But there was no time to rest. The second baby was coming, and Isabella could feel her strength wavering. The cold had settled deep in her bones, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. "Stay awake," she commanded herself. "They need you to stay awake." Her daughter arrived minutes later, her cry softer but just as determined as her brother's. Isabella gathered both babies against her, using her body heat to warm them as best she could. They were so small, so perfect, with skin the color of coffee with cream, just like hers. The reality of her situation crashed over her then. She was alone in an abandoned mining shack in the middle of a blizzard with 2 newborn babies. No supplies, no help, no way to call for rescue. The truth she'd been avoiding crystallized with terrible clarity. Wes had brought her here to die. Had probably planned it from the moment she'd started showing. The man she'd married, who'd promised to protect her, had left her and their children to freeze to death in this God-forsaken place. "I won't let that happen," she whispered fiercely to the twins, who had quieted against her chest. "I won't let him win." But staying alive meant staying awake, and Isabella could feel exhaustion dragging at her like quicksand. The lantern was barely burning now, its light growing fainter with each passing minute. She began to pray aloud, her voice the only sound besides the howling wind and the soft breathing of her newborns. "Lord, I know I made mistakes. I know I chose wrong when I married Wes. But these babies are innocent. They deserve a chance. Please," her voice cracked. "Please send help." Hours passed like years. Isabella fought against sleep with everything she had, telling stories to the twins, singing hymns her grandmother had taught her, reciting every Bible verse she could remember. The cold was a living thing now, creeping through her clothes, seeping into her bones. The babies stirred restlessly against her, their small faces scrunching with hunger she couldn't satisfy. "Just a little longer," she promised them, though she had no reason to believe help would ever come. "Mama's here. Mama's staying right here?" The storm outside seemed to be weakening, its fury diminishing to a steady snowfall. In the new quiet, Isabella thought she heard something. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the creaking shack or the wilderness. It was mechanical, rhythmic, growing louder. At first she thought she was hallucinating, her mind creating false hope in its desperate state. But the sound continued to grow, the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle engine cutting through the silence of the storm. Isabella's heart leaped, then immediately constricted with fear. Was it Wes, coming back to finish what he'd started? But no. She knew the sound of his truck, and this was different. This was someone else, someone unknown. The engine noise grew closer, and Isabella clutched her babies tighter, torn between calling out for help and staying silent. The twins stirred against her, as if sensing their mother's tension. In that moment, looking down at their innocent faces, Isabella made her choice. She couldn't let fear win. Not anymore. Not when her children's lives hung in the balance. Drawing in a deep breath of frigid air, she gathered her remaining strength. Help was coming, whether friend or foe she didn't know. But it was better than the certain death that awaited them if she did nothing. The motorcycle's thunder grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be right outside the shack. Isabella looked down at her twins, their faces peaceful despite everything, and felt a spark of hope flutter in her chest. Fragile but alive, like a candle flame in the dark. Whatever came through that door, she would face it. For them, she would face anything. The old wooden door burst open with a crack that echoed through the shack, letting in a swirl of snow and bitter wind. Isabella instinctively curled around her newborns, trying to shield them with her weakened body. A beam of light swept through the darkness, catching dust motes and frost in its path, before finding her huddled form in the corner. The figure in the doorway was massive, his silhouette filling the frame. Snow clung to his broad shoulders and dark beard, and his motorcycle boots left heavy prints as he stepped inside. The flashlight beam steadied on Isabella and the babies, revealing their desperate situation. "Please," Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Please don't hurt them." She tried to turn away, to hide the twins from view, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The hours of labor and cold had stolen her strength. The man moved forward with surprising gentleness for someone his size. As he came closer, Isabella could see his face in the dim light, weathered and serious with eyes that held concern rather than threat. He knelt beside her, setting the flashlight down so it cast enough light for him to work. "I'm Rook," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm going to check your pulse, okay?" He reached for her wrist with calloused fingers, his touch careful as he counted the beats. A frown creased his forehead. "You're too cold." Without hesitation, he shrugged out of his leather jacket. The movement revealed patches on his vest, motorcycle club insignias that would normally have terrified Isabella, but right now seemed less important than the warmth he was offering. He draped the jacket around her shoulders, and the residual heat from his body seeped into her frozen skin. "The babies," she managed to say. "They need help more than me." Rook nodded, already moving to the saddlebags he'd brought in. "How long ago were they born?" "Hours. I'm not sure exactly." Isabella watched as he pulled out supplies, clean rags, a water bottle, and what looked like chemical heating packs. "I tried to keep them warm, but—" "You did good," Rook assured her, his actions swift but gentle as he assessed the situation. He cracked the heating packs, shook them to activate the warmth, and wrapped them in clean rags. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the twins. Isabella hesitated only a moment before nodding. She watched like a hawk as his large hands carefully checked each baby, his movements surprisingly tender for someone who looked like he belonged in a biker gang. "They're fighters," he said, tucking the wrapped heating packs around the infants. "But we can't stay here. This shack won't keep out the cold much longer, and you all need medical attention." He looked around the bare room, taking in the situation. "Someone left you here on purpose." It wasn't a question, but Isabella answered anyway. "My husband. He said he was getting supplies, but—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Rook's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "Well, he's not coming back, and we need to get you three somewhere safe." He pulled more supplies from his bags, including a thick blanket that he wrapped around Isabella and the twins. "I know a place. It's not far, but we need to move now before the storm picks up again." Isabella tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. The room spun, and she clutched the babies tighter. "Easy," Rook said, steadying her. "I've got you." He considered for a moment, then made a decision. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll carry you and one of the babies. The other one will be secure inside my jacket, close to my body heat. It's not ideal, but it's the best way to transport them safely." He helped Isabella arrange the twins, taking extra care as he settled one baby inside his jacket, creating a secure pocket against his chest. The infant barely stirred, snuggling into the warmth. Then, with remarkable gentleness, he gathered Isabella and the other baby into his arms. She was struck by how steady he felt, like a rock in the storm that had almost claimed their lives. "Hold on," Rook said, his voice firm but kind as he moved toward the door. "I know a place." The wind howled outside, a reminder of the deadly cold waiting for them. But Isabella wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since her labor began, she felt something beyond fear and exhaustion. Hope, fragile but real, like the first ray of sunrise after the longest night of her life. Cradling her baby close and feeling the solid strength of Rook's arms around them, Isabella offered up a silent prayer of gratitude. Help had come, not in the form she would have expected, but perhaps in exactly the form they needed. The wind howled mercilessly as Rook carried Isabella and the twins through knee-deep snow. His boots crunched against the frozen ground with each deliberate step, following a narrow trail that wound up the mountainside. The path was barely visible in the swirling white, but Rook seemed to know it by heart. Isabella held one baby close to her chest, wrapped securely in Rook's leather jacket and the emergency blanket. The other infant was snuggled against Rook's torso, protected from the elements inside his vest. Both babies whimpered softly, their tiny cries nearly lost in the storm. "Not much further," Rook assured her, his voice steady despite the strain of carrying them all. "There's shelter ahead." Isabella tried to stay conscious, fighting the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. The warmth of Rook's body and the rhythmic motion of his careful steps made it difficult to keep her eyes open. She forced herself to focus on the terrain around them, jagged rock faces looming through the snow, scraggly pine trees bent under the weight of ice. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Rook turned sharply, ducking between two massive boulders. The wind died suddenly as they entered what appeared to be a cave entrance, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. "Here we are," Rook said, carefully setting Isabella down on a worn sleeping bag that lay against one wall. The cave was surprisingly deep, extending back into darkness. "Let me get some light in here." Moving with practiced efficiency, Rook retrieved a battery-powered lantern from a cache of supplies tucked into a natural alcove. The warm light revealed a simple but well-equipped survival shelter: sleeping bags, camping gear, boxes of non-perishable food, and basic medical supplies. "You prepared for this," Isabella observed weakly, cradling both babies now that Rook had helped transfer the second twin back to her arms. "I keep supplies in places like this," he explained, already gathering wood from a dry stack near the back of the cave. "Never know when you might need them." Within minutes, he had a small fire going in a ring of stones, the smoke drawing naturally toward a crack in the cave ceiling. The dancing flames cast flickering shadows on the rock walls as Rook filled a pot with snow and set it near the fire to melt. While the water heated, he rummaged through his supplies and came back with some clean cloths, a first aid kit, and what looked like military-grade emergency rations. "First thing is getting you hydrated," he said, measuring purification tablets into the now melted water. Isabella watched him work, her vision clearer now in the firelight. For the first time, she could really study the man who had saved their lives. His face was weathered, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years. Dark tattoos snaked up his neck and disappeared under his collar. The vest he wore was covered in patches, some faded with age. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the distinctive death's head emblem of the Hells Angels. Fear crept in, cold and familiar. Wes had connections to outlaw bikers. Was this a trick? Had he sent someone to find her? Rook must have noticed her tension. He paused in his work, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he handed her a cup of the cooled, purified water. "I see you spotted the patches," he said quietly. "I left the club years ago. Been on my own since then, just wandering." He helped her hold the cup steady as she drank. "Whatever you're running from, I'm not connected to it. You have my word." The water felt like life itself flowing into her body. Isabella studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. But his eyes held only concern, and what looked like old pain. "Why help us?" she asked, her voice stronger now. Rook was quiet for a moment, adding more wood to the fire. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally, "and because maybe I'm trying to balance some scales." He didn't elaborate, and Isabella didn't press. The warmth of the fire, the relative safety of the cave, and her body's desperate need for rest were all conspiring against her consciousness. The twins had finally fallen into peaceful sleep, their tiny faces relaxed in the firelight. "Rest," Rook said, noticing her struggle to stay awake. "I'll keep watch." Isabella wanted to resist, to ask more questions, to understand who this mysterious protector was. But exhaustion won out. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Rook's silhouette at the cave entrance, vigilant and still, listening to the storm for any sound that didn't belong. Through her fading consciousness, she heard the wind howling outside. But it seemed distant now, no longer a threat. The twins were warm against her chest, their breathing steady and strong. Despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the lingering questions about Rook's past, Isabella felt safer than she had in months. The fire crackled softly, its warmth reaching into her bones, and she finally surrendered to sleep. Rook remained at his post, a guardian between her little family and whatever dangers might be searching for them in the blizzard's fury. Gray morning light crept through the cave entrance, bringing with it the soft whisper of falling snow. Isabella stirred from her sleep, her body stiff from lying on the hard cave floor despite the sleeping bag Rook had carefully placed beneath her. The familiar sounds of hungry newborns filled the air, but something was different. Through bleary eyes, she saw a sight that made her heart skip. Rook, the intimidating former Hell's Angel, was cradling one of her babies with surprising gentleness. He sat cross-legged near the rekindled fire, testing the temperature of what appeared to be milk against his wrist. The other twin lay wrapped snugly in a clean blanket beside him, already fed and content. Isabella watched in wonder as his large, calloused hands delicately handled the tiny bottle he had somehow fashioned from supplies. "Hope you don't mind," Rook said softly, noticing she was awake. "They were getting hungry, and you needed the rest. Found some powdered milk in my supplies. Watered it down real careful like they taught us in emergency training." Isabella pushed herself up slowly, her body reminding her of the ordeal she'd been through. "You know about feeding newborns?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've had some experience with emergency situations." He carefully shifted the feeding baby in his arms. "These little ones are fighters, just like their mama." The simple praise brought unexpected tears to Isabella's eyes. She quickly wiped them away, hoping Rook hadn't noticed. But something in his expression told her he had. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate for all he'd done. She reached for the baby who had finished feeding, bringing her close. The infant's warmth against her chest felt like a miracle after the bitter cold of yesterday. Rook nodded, continuing to feed the other twin with practiced care. "There's some oatmeal warming by the fire for you. Need to keep your strength up." Isabella noticed then the small pot nestled in the coals. The simple gesture of thoughtfulness, preparing food while she slept, touched something deep inside her. How long had it been since someone had shown her such basic kindness? As the morning wore on, Rook showed her how he'd organized their temporary shelter. He'd set up a makeshift changing station using clean rags, and had even created a safe sleeping area for the twins using empty supply boxes padded with extra clothing. Everything was arranged with practical efficiency, but there was gentleness in how he handled every detail related to the babies. Around midday, after ensuring Isabella and the twins were comfortable and fed, Rook began gathering his gear. "Need to scout the area," he said, checking his knife and slipping it into his boot. "Make sure we're really alone up here." Fear gripped Isabella's chest. "How long will you be gone?" "Few hours at most. Need to check all approaches to the cave, see if anyone's been moving through the area." He must have seen the panic in her eyes because his voice softened. "You'll be safe here. Cave's well hidden, and I've got it stocked. Nobody knows about this place." Isabella nodded, trying to master her fear. The thought of being alone made her hands shake, but she forced herself to appear stronger than she felt. "We'll be okay." Rook paused at the cave entrance, snow swirling around his broad shoulders. "Keep the fire low. If you hear anything at all, move to the back of the cave. There's a narrow passage behind those boxes. It leads to another chamber." With that, he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and her precious babies. The hours crawled by like years. Every sound made her jump. The crack of a snow-laden branch, the whistle of wind through the rocks, the occasional cry of a bird. She kept the twins close, singing to them softly when they fussed, trying to control her growing anxiety as the day wore on. The gray light outside was fading into dusk when she heard footsteps approaching. She had already gathered the twins and was halfway to the back of the cave when Rook's familiar figure appeared in the entrance. But something was wrong. His body language was tense, alert in a way she hadn't seen before. "Pack everything you can carry," he said without preamble, moving quickly to gather supplies. "We need to be ready to move." Isabella's heart pounded. "What did you see?" Rook stopped his rapid packing and met her eyes, his expression grim. "Wes's gang. 4 bikes, moving in a search pattern through the woods below. They're not just passing through, they're looking for something." "But why?" Isabella clutched her babies closer. "He left us to die in that shack. Why would he be searching?" "Because he needs to be sure." Rook's voice was low, dangerous. "I watched them for a while. They're not looking for a body, Isabella. They're looking for tracks, signs of survival. They're looking for living people." The truth hit her like a physical blow. "The babies," she whispered. "He needs to make sure there are no witnesses, no proof." Rook nodded, his jaw tight. "This wasn't random abandonment. Whatever Wes is mixed up in, he can't risk leaving any loose ends." He moved closer, his presence both reassuring and fierce. "And now that I've helped you, I'm a loose end too." Isabella looked down at her twins, their innocent faces peaceful in sleep, unaware of the danger gathering around them. When she looked back up, her voice shook but held firm. "What do we do?" Rook's eyes were hard as steel as he continued his preparations. "First, we get ready. Then we wait for full dark. They're hunting you," he said, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. "And now they're hunting me too." The pale light of dawn crept into the cave, casting long shadows across the rocky floor. Rook moved with quiet efficiency, packing only the essentials they could carry. Isabella sat on a makeshift bed of blankets, cradling her twins while watching him prepare for their journey. "We need to move before they start searching again," Rook said, his voice barely above a whisper. He knelt beside Isabella, his weathered face etched with concern. "Can you stand?" Isabella nodded and tried to push herself up, but her legs trembled beneath her. The ordeal of giving birth in the freezing shack had taken its toll. Rook steadied her with a gentle hand. "Here," he said, pulling out what looked like a complex arrangement of straps and fabric from his pack. "It's a carrier I rigged up during the night. The twins will be secure against my chest, leaving my hands free to help you." Isabella watched anxiously as Rook carefully positioned her babies in the makeshift carrier. Her heart ached at letting them go, but she knew she couldn't carry them in her weakened state. Rook checked and double-checked every strap, making sure the infants were snug and warm against his broad chest. "They're safe," he assured her, seeing the worry in her eyes. "Now let's get you ready." He helped Isabella into his heavy leather jacket, which swallowed her small frame. Then he positioned himself beside her, wrapping a strong arm around her waist. "Lean on me. Take it slow." The journey down the mountain trail was grueling. Every step required intense concentration as they navigated the snow-covered path. Rook bore most of Isabella's weight, while also ensuring the precious cargo strapped to his chest remained protected. The twins, miraculously, stayed mostly quiet, lulled by the steady motion and warmth. Hours passed as they made their careful descent. Isabella's breathing grew labored, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. Rook called frequent stops, making her drink water and rest, though she could see the worry in his eyes about losing daylight. "Look," he said during one of their breaks, pointing through the trees. "See those chimneys? That's where we're heading." Through the bare branches, Isabella could make out wisps of smoke rising from what appeared to be a collection of cabins and small houses nestled in a protected valley. The sight gave her renewed strength, and they pressed on. As they approached the outskirts of the community, Isabella noticed the stillness. No children played in the yards. No young people moved between the buildings. Instead, she saw older faces appearing in windows, watching their approach with clear suspicion. The first person to emerge was a man in his late 60s, carrying a well-worn rifle pointed at the ground, a warning rather than a threat. "That's far enough," he called out. Rook stopped, keeping Isabella steady against him. "We need help," he said clearly, his voice carrying in the cold air. "Woman and 2 newborns. They're running from danger." More people emerged from the houses now, all older residents, their faces lined with years of mountain living. A woman with silver hair stepped forward, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of their appearance. "Those babies can't be more than 2 days old," she observed, moving closer despite the cautioning murmurs from others. "Child, what happened to you?" Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed her. Tears slid down her cheeks as she swayed on her feet. "Her husband left her to die in an old mining shack during the blizzard," Rook explained, his arm tightening protectively around Isabella. "She gave birth alone. I found them by chance. Now her husband's gang is hunting them, hunting all of us." The silver-haired woman's expression hardened at this news, but her eyes softened as she looked at Isabella. "I'm Evelyn Harper," she said, stepping forward and gently touching Isabella's arm. "And you look about ready to collapse, dear one." "The gang?" the man with the rifle asked, his voice gruff but concerned. "Later," Evelyn said firmly. "Right now, this young woman and those babies need warm beds and hot food." She turned to address the gathering crowd of elders. "Anyone objects to helping a mother and her newborns, they can take it up with me personally." The tension broke as several people moved forward to help. Rook carefully unstrapped the twins, and 2 women immediately came forward with blankets to wrap them. Isabella wavered, panic flaring at seeing her babies in strangers' arms, but Evelyn's steady presence beside her was oddly calming. "They're safe here," Evelyn assured her, taking Isabella's arm. "We take care of our own in these mountains, and right now that includes you." They helped Isabella to Evelyn's house, a sturdy ranch-style home with a wide porch and warm lights glowing in the windows. Inside, everything smelled of wood smoke and something delicious simmering on the stove. "My late husband built this place," Evelyn said as she guided Isabella to a comfortable cot already prepared with fresh linens. "Plenty of room for a mother and her little ones." The twins were placed in a makeshift bassinet nearby, and Isabella felt tears of relief when she saw they were sleeping peacefully. Evelyn disappeared briefly and returned with a bowl of steaming soup. "Eat," she said, her tone gentle but brooking no argument. "Then rest. You're safe here." Isabella's hands shook as she took the bowl, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "No need for thanks," Evelyn said, settling into a chair beside the cot. "Just focus on getting your strength back. Everything else can wait." The rich soup and Evelyn's quiet presence began to work their magic. For the first time since the terrifying ordeal began, Isabella felt the hard knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. As she drifted toward sleep, she could hear the low murmur of voices, Rook and the elders discussing plans, she assumed, but Evelyn's steady presence kept the worry at bay. "Rest now." Evelyn's voice came softly through the encroaching darkness of sleep. "Tomorrow is soon enough to face whatever comes next." The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Evelyn's home as Isabella slowly opened her eyes. The familiar panic of waking in a strange place was quickly soothed by the homey sounds and smells surrounding her. The crackling wood stove filled the room with gentle warmth, and the aroma of fresh-baked biscuits wafted through the air, reminding her of a childhood she'd almost forgotten. Her gaze immediately went to the makeshift bassinet, where her twins slept peacefully. Then she noticed Rook, slumped in a chair near the door, his eyes tired but alert. He'd kept watch all night, just as he'd promised. "Morning," he said softly, straightening up. "The baby slept well. Only woke twice for feeding." Isabella's throat tightened with emotion. In all her months of pregnancy, Wes had never shown such concern. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did," Rook replied simply. Evelyn appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" Before Isabella could answer, a gentle knock at the door made her tense. Rook was on his feet instantly, but Evelyn just smiled. "That'll be Mr. Harlan," she said, opening the door to reveal a tall, distinguished-looking black man in his early 70s. He carried a worn leather medical bag and moved with the precise efficiency of someone used to emergencies. "Good morning, Miss Isabella," he said, his voice deep and reassuring. "I'm Harlan Bryant, retired Army medic. Mind if I take a look at you and the little ones?" Isabella nodded, watching carefully as he washed his hands and began his examination. His movements were gentle but confident, checking her vital signs before moving to the twins. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he commented, his practiced hands checking each baby thoroughly. "All three of you are showing signs of malnourishment, but nothing we can't fix with proper care and nutrition." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes at his kind, matter-of-fact tone. Even when checking her bruises, he maintained a respectful, professional demeanor that made her feel safe rather than exposed. "The babies need regular feeding and warmth, which they're getting now," he continued. "You, young lady, need rest and good food, lots of both." As if on cue, Evelyn appeared with a tray laden with warm biscuits, eggs, and tea. "Already working on that part," she said with a smile. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of visitors arrived, each bearing gifts and offers of help. Mrs. Peterson brought hand-knitted blankets in soft pastel colors. The Johnson sisters arrived with tiny clothes they'd saved from their own children, now grown and gone. Mr. Roberts delivered a rocking chair he'd quickly repaired, saying every mother needed a proper place to nurse. Isabella found herself overwhelmed by each act of kindness. When Mrs. Thompson arrived with a homemade stew and fresh bread, explaining she'd be bringing dinner every evening for a week, Isabella couldn't hold back her tears. "I don't deserve all this," she whispered to Evelyn, who sat beside her as she fed one of the twins. "Nonsense," Evelyn replied firmly. "Every person deserves kindness, especially a brave young mother who's fought so hard to protect her babies." The words struck deep in Isabella's heart. Throughout her marriage to Wes, she'd grown accustomed to harsh words and harsher treatment. Kindness had become foreign, something she'd stopped expecting or believing she deserved. As the day progressed, Isabella watched in amazement as the community rallied around her. Mr. Harlan returned in the afternoon to check on them again, bringing vitamins and supplements from his personal supplies. The elderly Mrs. Davis spent an hour teaching Isabella different ways to swaddle the babies for comfort. Each interaction was filled with a genuine warmth that made her chest ache with unfamiliar emotion. "Your little ones need names," Evelyn mentioned softly as evening approached. "Have you thought about what you'd like to call them?" Isabella looked down at her daughters, really seeing them in the warm light of safety. "I haven't dared," she admitted. "I was so afraid." "Well, now you can dare," Evelyn said firmly. "You're not alone anymore." The truth of those words hit Isabella hard. For the first time, she allowed herself to really feel the contrast between her life with Wes and the kindness she'd experienced in just one day among these strangers. Wes had never once asked about names for the babies. He'd never shown any interest in her pregnancy beyond using it to control her. Yet here were people she'd never met before, treating her and her children with more love and respect than she'd known in years. As night fell, the house grew quiet. Evelyn had gone to bed, assuring Isabella she only needed to call if she needed anything. The twins were settled after their evening feeding, but the smaller one was fussy. Before Isabella could move to comfort her, Rook carefully lifted the baby from the bassinet. "Rest," he said quietly. "I've got this." Isabella watched in wonder as the former Hell's Angel, with his tattoos and battle-worn appearance, gently rocked her daughter. His large hands were incredibly tender as he cradled the tiny infant, humming softly under his breath. The baby gradually settled, her tiny fingers curling around one of his rough digits. In that moment, watching this unlikely guardian soothing her child, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Safety. Real, complete safety. The feeling wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to fully relax. The wood stove crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Outside, crickets chirped in the mountain night, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Inside, in this haven of unexpected kindness, Isabella watched Rook rock her daughter to sleep and felt hope bloom in her heart like a flower reaching for the sun. The morning sun peeked through Evelyn's kitchen window, its warm rays melting the last patches of snow from the recent storm. Isabella stood at the sink, carefully washing dishes while keeping an eye on her twins sleeping peacefully in their makeshift bassinet nearby. The sound of hammering and male voices drifted in from outside, where Rook was helping repair the community's generator. "You don't need to do those dishes, dear," Evelyn said, entering the kitchen with a basket of fresh laundry. "You're still recovering." Isabella smiled softly, continuing to scrub a pot. "I want to help. You've all done so much for us already." She glanced at her sleeping babies. "Besides, it feels good to do normal things again." Evelyn nodded, understanding, setting down her basket. "Well then, would you like to help me hang these sheets? The sunshine will do you good." Together they stepped out into the crisp mountain air. Isabella breathed deeply, savoring the fresh scent of pine and melting snow. As they hung the sheets, she watched Rook working with Mr. Roberts and several other elders around the generator. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing his tattooed arms as he carefully adjusted something inside the machine. "He's quite handy," Evelyn remarked, following Isabella's gaze. "Fixed my truck yesterday, too. The elders are mighty impressed." Isabella nodded, thinking how different Rook was from what she'd initially feared. When she'd first seen his Hell's Angels patches in that desperate moment at the mining shack, terror had gripped her heart. Now, watching him work so diligently to help others, she saw a man seeking redemption through service. The days began to settle into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Isabella would help Evelyn with household tasks, while Rook took on various repair projects around the community. The twins grew stronger, their tiny faces filling out as they gained weight. Isabella found herself recovering not just physically, but emotionally as well. One afternoon, while folding laundry on Evelyn's porch, Isabella watched Rook holding one of the twins. He sat in the old rocking chair, speaking softly to the baby about the different birds visiting the feeder. His rough hands were impossibly gentle as he cradled her daughter, and something warm unfurled in Isabella's chest at the sight. "Never thought I'd see the day," Mr. Roberts commented, pausing by the porch. "A former outlaw making baby talk." But his eyes were kind as he watched Rook with the infant. The community's acceptance of Rook grew steadily. His willingness to help with any task, combined with his protective presence, had won over even the most skeptical elders. They began to seek his advice on mechanical problems and include him in their daily conversations. As the week progressed, Isabella noticed her own feelings shifting. The initial fear and desperate gratitude toward Rook had evolved into something different, a quiet companionship built on shared experiences and unspoken understanding. She found comfort in his steady presence, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. One evening, Mrs. Thompson approached Isabella with an idea. "We'd like to host a little celebration," she said, her eyes twinkling, "to properly welcome these precious babies to our community." The next afternoon, the elders gathered in Evelyn's backyard. They brought dishes of home-cooked food, Mrs. Peterson's famous fried chicken, the Johnson sisters' apple pies, Mr. Harlan's cornbread. Someone had strung up white Christmas lights in the trees, and bouquets of wildflowers decorated the tables. Isabella sat in a chair of honor, one twin in her arms while Rook held the other. The community members came forward one by one, offering blessings and good wishes for the babies. Mr. Harlan presented them with hand-carved wooden rattles, while Mrs. Davis had sewn beautiful quilts with the babies' birth dates embroidered in the corners. "We need to know what to call these little ones," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "Have you chosen names?" Isabella looked down at her daughters, then up at Rook, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Hope," she said softly, touching the baby in her arms. "And Grace." She smiled at the twin Rook held. "Because that's what they've brought into my life." Murmurs of approval rippled through the gathering. Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes, and several other community members dabbed at their faces as well. As the celebration continued, Isabella watched Rook interacting with the elders. Gone was the tension he'd carried when they first arrived. He laughed at Mr. Roberts' jokes, discussed engine repairs with Mr. Thompson, and accepted seconds of Mrs. Peterson's chicken with genuine appreciation. He belonged here, just as she did. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The white lights twinkled in the growing dusk, and the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming evening primrose. Isabella sat contentedly, Grace sleeping in her arms while Rook stood beside her chair, gently rocking Hope. Looking up at him, at this man who had risked everything to save her and her children, Isabella felt overwhelming gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rook looked down at her, his eyes soft in the gathering darkness. "Maybe you saved me too," he responded quietly, and in his voice she heard the truth of it. The community members continued their celebrations around them, their voices warm and happy in the evening air. In that moment, surrounded by kindness and acceptance, Isabella realized they had all found something precious here, not just safety, but belonging. A chance to heal, to grow, and to build something new from the ashes of their past pain. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the windows of Evelyn's farmhouse. Isabella sat at the kitchen table, feeding Hope while Grace dozed in a bassinet nearby. The peaceful routine of the past week had started to feel almost normal. The gentle clinking of dishes as Evelyn prepared breakfast, the distant sound of chickens in the yard, and Rook's steady footsteps as he came in from his morning perimeter check. But that peace shattered in an instant. The first rumble was distant, so faint it could have been thunder. Rook's head snapped up, his body tensing like a wire pulled taut. Isabella's heart stopped, then started racing as the sound grew louder. Multiple engines getting closer. "Get everyone inside," Rook commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "Now!" Evelyn moved swiftly to the window, her face paling. "I'll alert the others," she said, hurrying to the phone mounted on the wall. Isabella clutched Hope tighter to her chest, her hands trembling as she rose from her chair. The rumbling grew louder, echoing off the mountainsides. Rook strode to the window, his shoulders rigid as he scanned the ridgeline. Through the glass, she could see dust clouds rising from the road that wound down into their valley. "It's them," he said grimly. "Wes's gang. I count at least 6 bikes." The community burst into action. Mr. Roberts and Mr. Thompson rushed past the house, helping to usher other elders indoors. Mrs. Davis hurried across the yard with her granddaughter, disappearing into her home. Within minutes, the once bustling community had gone still, doors and windows locked tight. Rook turned to Isabella, his eyes intense. "The cellar," he said, already moving to lift Grace from the bassinet. "Under the barn. It's our best chance." Isabella wanted to protest, to beg him not to leave them, but she knew better. They hurried across the yard, the babies mercifully quiet against their chests. The barn doors creaked as Rook pulled them open, revealing the musty interior filled with hay and old farm equipment. In the back corner, partially hidden by stacked feed bags, was a heavy wooden trap door. Rook lifted it with one hand, revealing steep stairs descending into darkness. The cellar smelled of earth and old wood, but it was dry and secure. "Stay quiet," Rook whispered, helping Isabella down the stairs with the twins. "No matter what you hear, promise me." Isabella nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Please be careful," she managed to say. Rook's hand brushed her cheek for just a moment. Then he was gone, the trapdoor closing with a soft thud that seemed to seal them away from the world above. Through gaps in the wooden slats, Isabella could see slivers of the barn's interior. She heard Rook's footsteps moving away. Then silence. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Voices carried across the property, rough, angry voices that made her pull the twins closer. Come out, wherever you are," a familiar voice called out mockingly. "Wes." Isabella's whole body went cold at the sound. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Through the slats, she caught glimpses of boots moving past the barn. The twins stirred against her chest, and she prayed they would stay quiet. A sudden crash from the direction of the tool shed made her jump, the sound of fists meeting flesh, grunts of pain. Isabella pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from crying out as she heard Rook's voice, defiant even in pain. "She's gone," he spat. "Long gone. You're wasting your time." Wes's laugh was cruel. "Always playing the hero, aren't you? But heroes don't last long in my world." More sounds of struggle. Through her limited view, Isabella saw them drag Rook past the barn. His face was bloodied, his arms wrenched behind his back. 2 of Wes's men held him, while a third tied his hands with rope. "Search every building," Wes commanded. "They're here somewhere, and when we find them—" He grabbed Rook's hair, yanking his head back. "Time to finish what I started." They hauled Rook toward the road, his boots dragging in the dust. Isabella pressed herself against the cellar wall, one hand cradling each twin's head as tears rolled silently down her face. Above, heavy boots thundered through the barn, but the cellar door remained undiscovered beneath its camouflage of feed bags and hay. The last thing she heard was the roar of motorcycles starting up again, and Wes's voice carrying on the wind. "Time to finish what I started." Then silence fell, broken only by the sound of her own terrified breathing and the soft whimpers of her daughters in the darkness of the cellar. The silence that followed the motorcycle's departure felt deafening. Isabella remained frozen in the cellar, her babies held close, until she was certain Wes and his men were gone. Her hands shook as she climbed the steep stairs, pushing against the heavy trap door with her shoulder. Sunlight streamed through the barn's dusty windows, a cruel contrast to the darkness that had just descended upon their peaceful community. Isabella's legs gave way as she emerged, and she sank to her knees in the hay, her chest heaving with sobs she could no longer contain. "Oh, Lord," she whispered, rocking back and forth with the twins. "Why does everything I touch turn to pain?" The barn door creaked open, and Evelyn rushed in, followed by Mr. Harlan. Their faces were etched with concern as they hurried to her side. "Child," Evelyn said softly, kneeling beside her, "let's get you inside where it's safe." Mr. Harlan gently took Grace from Isabella's trembling arms, while Evelyn supported her other side, helping her stand. Hope whimpered against Isabella's chest, sensing her mother's distress. "They took him," Isabella choked out as they walked toward Evelyn's house. "Rook saved us, and now they're going to kill him because of me." "Now don't you talk like that," Mr. Harlan's steady voice cut through her anguish. His military bearing was evident in his straight spine and determined expression. "That man made his own choice to protect you and these precious little ones. He knew the risks." Inside Evelyn's warm kitchen, Isabella collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. "Everything I touch turns to ash," she whispered. "My marriage, my life, and now Rook. I'm cursed, bringing destruction to anyone who tries to help me." Evelyn's firm hands gripped Isabella's shoulders. "Listen to me, Isabella Carter. You are not cursed. You are blessed. Blessed with strength you don't even see yet. Blessed with these beautiful daughters." She gestured to the twins, now peaceful in their makeshift bassinets. "And blessed with a community that won't let you face this alone." "But Rook saw something in you worth fighting for," Mr. Harlan interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "That man's been wandering lost for years, according to what he told me. But helping you and these babies, that gave him purpose. Don't diminish his choice by blaming yourself." Isabella wiped her eyes, looking at her daughters. Their tiny faces were relaxed in sleep, unaware of the chaos surrounding them. She thought of how Rook had cared for them, his rough hand so gentle as he fed them, changed them, rocked them to sleep. "He believed in you," Evelyn said softly. "Now it's time for you to believe in yourself." Taking a deep breath, Isabella straightened her shoulders. "What can I do? I can't just sit here while Wes—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "First things first," Evelyn said practically. "Let's gather what the babies might need. We don't know what's coming, but we need to be prepared." Isabella nodded, finding purpose in the simple task. She moved through the house, collecting diapers, formula, and clean clothes. Her hands were steady now as she packed everything into a bag. Mr. Harlan had stepped outside to speak with other community members, and soon the house began filling with elders. Mrs. Thompson brought extra blankets. Mr. Roberts arrived with his old military radio. Mr. Davis carried in maps of the surrounding area. They gathered in Evelyn's living room, their faces grave but determined. Isabella stood in the doorway, watching these people who had become more family to her in a few days than her own flesh and blood had been in years. We've all seen too much in our lives to stand by while evil men do evil things, Mr. Harlan said, addressing the group. Rook Maddox might be a stranger to some of us, but he protected one of our own. That makes him family. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Mrs. Thompson spoke up, her voice wavering but strong. Those of us who can't fight can watch the babies, keep them safe and fed. I've got my old hunting rifles, Mr. Roberts added. Still know how to use them, too. Isabella's throat tightened as she listened to these people, these wonderful, brave people planning to help save Rook. They weren't young or strong like Wes's gang. They were grandparents, retirees, people who should be enjoying peaceful golden years. Yet here they were, willing to risk everything for her and Rook. Evelyn stood up, her presence commanding attention. We're mountain folk, she declared. We take care of our own. Isabella and those precious babies are family now. And Rook? He earned his place here the moment he chose to help them. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. We won't abandon either of them. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. For the first time in her life, she felt truly part of something bigger than herself. These people had shown her what real family meant, not through blood or marriage, but through choice and love and sacrifice. Thank you, she whispered, though the words seemed inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Mr. Harlan patted her shoulder as he passed. You're worth it, child. Don't ever doubt that again. The living room buzzed with activity as the elders continued planning, their voices filled with purpose and determination. Isabella went to check on her daughters, finding them still sleeping peacefully. She touched each tiny face, drawing strength from their presence. Your daddy was wrong about me, she whispered to them. And maybe I've been wrong about myself too. These people see something in me worth fighting for, just like Rook did. She straightened up, squaring her shoulders. And I'm going to prove them right. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Evelyn's kitchen table, where hand-drawn maps and old forestry guides lay scattered. Mr. Harlan traced his finger along a faded trail marking. The old lumber mill sits here, he explained, tapping the paper. Only 2 roads in, both easily blocked. We've got 4 working trucks between us. Mrs. Thompson adjusted her reading glasses, leaning forward. The mill's been empty since 1988. Power's still connected but unused. My Herald helped wire that place. I remember where the main breaker sits. Isabella cradled her daughters close, watching these determined faces around the table. The twins were bundled snugly, quiet against her chest, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Mr. Roberts tested his old military radio, static crackling through the kitchen. Still works. We'll coordinate in teams, just like the old days. I'm coming with you, Isabella said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Evelyn started to protest, but Isabella shook her head. These are my babies. And Rook. She paused, steadying herself. Rook risked everything for us. I won't hide while you risk yourselves too. Mr. Harlan studied her face, then nodded slowly. We'll need every hand, but those little ones? I have a plan, Isabella said, showing them the sling she'd fashioned, designed to wear beneath her coat. The babies would be secure and hidden, close to her warmth. As evening approached, their makeshift rescue party moved into position. 3 trucks concealed themselves along the mill's access roads. Mrs. Thompson and Mr. Davis waited by the power station, ready to cut electricity. The old radio crackled with whispered updates as they confirmed Wes's gang was indeed inside the mill. Isabella's heart pounded as she crouched behind crates near the mill's side entrance, her babies sleeping soundly in their hidden sling. The building loomed dark and massive against the twilight sky. Through broken windows, she could see movement, shadows passing by lamplight. Mr. Harlan's voice whispered through the radio. Now. The mill plunged into darkness. Confused shouts erupted from inside. Seconds later, ancient machinery roared to life at the opposite end of the building, Mr. Roberts's diversion. The sound of engines filled the air as the community's trucks moved to block the exits, their headlights creating chaos of light and shadow. Isabella slipped through the side door, her feet silent on the dusty floor. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness as she navigated between old equipment and stacked lumber. The baby stayed mercifully quiet, lulled by her movement and the mechanical noise echoing through the building. She heard Wes's angry voice from somewhere ahead. "Find out what's happening, and watch him." Following the sound, Isabella crept forward until she saw him, Rook, tied to a support beam. His face was bruised, dried blood at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were open. Alert. Alive. She waited until the guard moved toward the commotion outside, then darted to Rook's side. "I'm here," she whispered, her fingers already working at the ropes. Rook's eyes widened in recognition. His voice was rough, barely audible. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Heavy boots thundered across the mill's wooden floor as Wes's angry voice cut through the mechanical noise. "They're here for him. Get your guns. Nobody leaves." The beam of his flashlight sliced through the darkness, swinging wildly as he rallied his gang. Isabella's fingers trembled as she worked at Rook's ropes, her heart pounding so hard she feared Wes would hear it. The twins stirred against her chest, but remained quiet, as if understanding the desperate need for silence. "Almost got it," she whispered, pulling at a stubborn knot. Rook flexed his wrists, helping to loosen the bindings. Suddenly, the flashlight beam caught them. "Well, well," Wes sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Look who came back from the dead." He stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "And you brought my babies too. How thoughtful." Isabella stood frozen as Wes advanced, her body instinctively curling around the twins. Behind her, she could hear Rook working frantically at his restraints. Wes lunged forward, hands reaching for Isabella, but in that same moment, the ropes finally gave way. Rook burst from his bonds and threw himself between them, catching Wes mid-stride. Both men crashed into a stack of lumber, sending it toppling. "Run!" Rook shouted to Isabella, grappling with Wes on the dusty floor. Despite his injuries, Rook fought with desperate strength, landing solid punches that made Wes howl in rage. But Isabella didn't run. She couldn't leave Rook, not again. Through the chaos, she saw Mr. Harlan and two other elders moving silently through the shadows, carrying coils of thick rope. Wes and Rook rolled across the floor, trading blows. Blood trickled from Rook's reopened wounds, but his grip never loosened. He had one thought burning in his mind. Keep Wes away from Isabella and the babies. Mr. Harlan's voice cut through the darkness. "Now!" The elders moved with surprising speed for their age, their experience making up for any lost youth. They surrounded the fighting men, waiting for their moment. When Wes tried to push away from Rook, they pounced. Mr. Harlan's steady hands looped rope around Wes's thrashing legs while the others secured his arms. Their movements were precise, calculated, the kind of teamwork learned through decades of handling unruly cattle and emergency situations. "You can't do this!" Wes spat, struggling against the restraints. "I'll kill all of you!" "No, son," Mr. Harlan said calmly, pulling the knots tight. "You won't be hurting anyone anymore." Red and blue lights suddenly flashed through the mill's broken windows, accompanied by the wail of police sirens. Evelyn had made the call hours ago, timing it perfectly with their rescue attempt. Officers swarmed the building, quickly subduing Wes's scattered gang members. A senior detective approached Wes, shaking his head. "Wesley Granger, we've been looking for you across 3 states. Murder, assault, drug trafficking, the list goes on." Isabella watched as they led Wes away in handcuffs, his threats fading into the night. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only relief washing over her like a cleansing rain. Rook stood nearby, swaying slightly from exhaustion and his injuries. Isabella moved to his side, letting him lean against her shoulder. The twins stirred in their sling, making soft, cooing sounds that seemed to ease the tension in Rook's face. "We're safe now," Isabella whispered, reaching up to touch his bruised cheek. Her voice filled with emotion as she added, "Because you fought for us." Rook's hand found hers, squeezing gently. In that touch was everything they didn't need to say: the fear they'd overcome, the trust they'd built, and the future they could now imagine without shadows hanging over them. The old lumber mill, which had started the evening as a place of darkness and fear, now hummed with activity and hope. Emergency lights cast a soft glow over the community members who had risked everything to protect their own. Mr. Harlan was speaking with the police, giving his statement with military precision. Evelyn had appeared with blankets and her ever-present thermos of hot coffee, tending to everyone with maternal efficiency. Isabella stood with Rook, supporting each other, as their unlikely family of elders gathered around them. The twins, finally free from their hiding place, reached out with tiny hands toward Rook's familiar face. In their innocent gestures was the promise of tomorrow, a tomorrow they had all fought to secure. The mountain air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers as dawn broke over the community 1 week after Wes's arrest. Golden sunlight spilled across the renovated cottage where Isabella now lived, just a stone's throw from Evelyn's wraparound porch. The modest home, once empty, now buzzed with new life and hope. Inside, Isabella gently rocked one of the twins while Mrs. Peterson, one of the community elders, expertly swaddled the other baby in a soft blanket she had knitted herself. These moments of shared care had become wonderfully routine over the past week. "These little ones are growing stronger every day," Mrs. Peterson said, her weathered hands gentle as she passed the bundled infant back to Isabella. Through the window, Isabella could see Rook working with Mr. Davis and Mr. Roberts to repair the community center's roof. His bruises had faded, and his movements were strong and sure again. The local sheriff had personally delivered the news 3 days ago. All old charges against Rook had been dropped. Years of investigation had confirmed what many suspected. He'd been framed by corrupt members of his former club. "He's good with his hands," Evelyn remarked, entering with a basket of fresh muffins. "Fixed my front steps yesterday like they were brand new." Isabella smiled, watching Rook pause his work to wave at the twins through the window. He had surprised everyone by announcing he would stay, purchasing an old cabin on the edge of town that needed fixing up. The elders had welcomed him like a long-lost son. The days passed peacefully now. Each morning brought new signs of healing, both physical and emotional. The twins grew stronger, their cries more robust, their smiles more frequent. Isabella found herself laughing more, especially when Rook would show up with random baby items he'd discovered in town, like the tiny boots he'd found perfect for future mountain climbing. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear. The community gathered in the meadow behind the church, where wild grass swayed in the gentle breeze. Wooden benches had been arranged in a circle, with flowers and ribbons decorating the simple setup. Isabella dressed the twins in white gowns handed down through generations of mountain families. Rook stood beside her, looking almost shy in clean jeans and a pressed shirt. His hands, usually rough from work, were freshly washed as he carefully held one of the babies. The elderly pastor, Reverend Thomas, smiled warmly at the gathering. "Today we celebrate new life," he began, his voice carrying across the meadow. "Not just the precious lives of these twins, but the new life that springs from community, from faith, and from love." Isabella felt tears well up as the pastor blessed each baby, sprinkling holy water that caught the sunlight like diamonds. The elders watched with misty eyes, each one having played a part in this journey. Mr. Harlan sat proudly in his Sunday best, while Mrs. Peterson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. After the service, as people mingled and shared food from a potluck spread, Rook gently lifted one of the twins high into his arms. The baby cooed, reaching tiny fingers toward his face. "Your mama saved me as much as I saved her," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella stood beside him, cradling their other baby. She gazed toward the mountains, their peaks standing strong and eternal against the blue sky. For the first time in her life, she felt completely certain God had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. The mountain community had become more than a refuge. It was home. These people were family. And in the midst of it all, she and Rook had found something neither expected: a chance to heal, to trust, and to build a future filled with love and purpose. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.